understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.
Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. I'm your host, Nnamdi Oswagu, and joining me is the CEO of Cloud Capital, Ed Barrow. Ed, how are you today?
I'm very good, thank you, Nnamdi. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Before we jump into it, we're just going to do some housekeeping, and I'm going to introduce my guests formally. We are streaming live from Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We have a separate stream going from Instagram as well. So for those who want to make comments, if you're on Instagram, join the YouTube channel or go to our website, and then you can make comments. For everyone else, do what you do, make comments, and we will answer your questions. Now, let me formally introduce my guests so we can get into it. Today's show, cloud costs could wreck your 2026 budget. Here's how to stop it. Ed Barrow is the CEO and founder of Cloud Capital, a company dedicated to helping finance and engineering leaders forecast and optimize cloud spending without financial risk. Ed has spent his career at the intersection of technology, strategy, and growth. He co-founded IDEO, an AI-driven platform used by global B2B brands, and successfully led the business through rapid expansion, mergers and acquisitions, and its eventual exit to Episerver, now Optimizely. Following the acquisition, Ed helped shape global product and M&A strategy, guiding multiple acquisitions and driving 400% growth. At Cloud Capital, he is building the financial layer for the next generation of tech companies, turning cloud spend into a strategic advantage rather than liability, by giving finance teams clarity and control while enabling engineering to move fast without waste. Ed is helping businesses transform one of their largest expenses into a growth driver. It's powerful, Ed.
Thank you. It's a fun journey, Will.
No, I definitely love it. I mean, it's one of those conversations that most don't get into. We always talk about cloud resources, what we need, where are we going to deploy. Me, I'm on the security side. So it's like, okay, how are we going to secure this? What resources we need, looking at DevOps, looking at shift left, all these things. But the money, right? It's from the small startups to the, major global companies, cloud spend is totally, sometimes even unpredictable, right? Because you think you're at one course, you might have kept something on way too long, all of a sudden your course blow up. So this show title, in terms of cloud costs could wreck your 2026 budget, really interested in diving into it with you. What made you choose this path?
Well, I think it's, as you said, it's a cost that sits behind every business. When we look around the world today, our entire lives are driven by technology, and almost every company now are using cloud infrastructure to drive their business. So it is the foundation that we've all been building on for decades now. And yet it is actually, as you said, one of the least understood, least well-managed parts of any company's P&L, and was a real challenge. I faced this problem firsthand way back when we were building my first startup, and we suddenly started to see our AWS bill start to grow very rapidly, all the way through to when I was at Optimizely. We had tens of millions a year in cloud spend, and just trying to understand that, plan and forecast that, and then try and drive both the growth of the business and innovation, but also control those costs became a real challenge. Today, most kind of typical software companies see cloud infrastructure as their second highest cost after headcount. We have people and we have cloud, and we're putting those resources together and we're building products and delivering innovation. And that's where we really see a huge opportunity for not just engineering teams to build products, but actually it's now increasingly a major area of focus for finance teams as these costs, frankly, balloon, particularly in the current world that we're in.
Yeah, so that's like a big problem. There's so many hidden costs. Like, what are some strategies companies can do to start, seeing, okay, how can we forecast this better? Because I think that's where the biggest problem lies, is the surprise factor, right? Like, you're doing all this cool tech stuff, you're getting users onboarded, everyone's happy, you're hitting those benchmarks, but then all of a sudden you get this unexpected bill that you didn't account for.
Yeah, absolutely. And that bill is normally, for most finance teams, in the form of a 70-page PDF that comes along with the Amazon bill or the AWS bill, or the Google Cloud bill. And suddenly you're trying to work out, why on earth is this 20-40% higher than it was last month? What's driven that? Is that going to continue? Is this a one-off? How do we better manage that? Either bring those costs back down or just more appropriately budget in the first place. And I think, the most important thing to understand is building a budget is not going to work if you're just looking at, last month's spend and timesing that by 12, or adding some kind of arbitrary growth. The challenge is that cloud doesn't scale in a predictable way for many companies. It's not linear with new customers or revenue growth. Actually, there's a lot of drivers behind the scenes that can change your cloud spend. So I think, first of all, just recognizing that this is a really important line item. For many companies, it traditionally was sort of around 10% of revenue for software companies were being spent on cloud. These days, with AI, we're seeing that, for many AI startups, be 30-40% of revenue. In fact, we work with a few companies that were spending more than 100% of their revenue on cloud infrastructure. So, first of all, just recognizing as a finance team that this is a major area of spend that can be very unpredictable, and just to spend the time on it. I think that's first and most important thing. And then the second element is that actually, to build a good forecast, a good budget, you need to build relationships between finance and engineering teams. That actually the key to a predictable model is bringing those two teams together, actively collaborating, communicating with each other, and where needed, translating. As we all know, engineering teams are there building products, making sure they're secure, they're scalable, they're delivering the value to the end user, to the customer. But they look at cloud in terms of servers and databases and storage and network and all of those things very much from a technical perspective. That's not how a business scales. A business scales with customers and products and usage. And being able to translate from, we're running X number of servers today, but if our company grows 50%, what does that mean? Do we need 50% more servers? Do we need less? How is that going to change? And so actually bringing those two teams together is often a real challenge. Often it feels like they're talking very different languages, and being able to help them communicate, help them translate their plans into a more reliable forecast and a reliable plan is really the first area that many companies are digging into for really the first time.
So you know what? Let's take a step back and talk about that, right? So if we look at it from a company dynamic, we have the infrastructure team, we have the finance guys, we have like the CFO and the people that report to him, right? What other pieces of that puzzle are we missing in terms of cloud spend?
Well, so I think there's really two things that drive your cloud infrastructure. One is your consumers, your customers, your end users. They interact with your product. That's going to require some level of cloud usage, cloud consumption, whether it's servers, databases, network transfer, all the rest of it. So understanding how your business is going to grow and having that forecast, which often sits in the hands of the finance team, and then translating that into what does that actually mean for our usage? If we add more customers, what part of our infrastructure is going to have to scale? Now, obviously, some of your spend is used for testing, development, model training, things which don't directly connect to usage by the end customer. But obviously, there's a reasonable chunk, typically 60 to 70% of your cloud spend, that is actually used to drive the end customer experience. And so connecting those things together, understanding what's going to lead to increased consumption. And then the second element that's really important is actually understanding the engineering roadmap. So often engineering teams obviously are developing new capabilities, but also re-architecting parts of the platform, migrating from one product or service to another. And all of those kind of activities often have a step change impact on your cloud spend. They may have, cause a big increase or indeed actually reduce your spend. And understanding when those are happening, what the likely impact is going to be, is really, really important. It's very easy to see your cloud bill 1 month shoot up. No more customers were added, or growth was very predictable, but suddenly your cloud bill has exploded. And that can often be because engineering have gone off and built a new part of the product, which is great. That's exactly what we wanted them to do. But if we didn't understand that, if finance teams didn't really recognize that was going to happen and the impact that was going to cause, then you get into this out of control bill, and you get into a very difficult relationship where finance teams are constantly bugging their engineers and their product teams to say, why was the bill this way? How can we fix that? Let's down tools on new development and innovation and go off and try and find some savings, which is obviously very disruptive to the business.
Interesting, right? So we have the finance teams. We have it seems like it's two different pillars, right? When you're looking at from a C-suite's perspective, you have the CTO and everyone who reports to that individual. You have the CFO and then everyone that reports to that individual. I remember early on in the development lifecycle, right? Just getting production support and infrastructure and the developers to coordinate, right? And that whole thing where we're trying to push the product through to production and not just throw it over the fence. That took years, methodology, DevOps, all these things that come out. What do you see similar? I see something similar that's needed in this respect, right? Because the huge one of the challenges, and I'm dating myself because I'm talking about, maybe 20 years ago, right? You're in this banking world. We have a production support team. We have the developers. It's not as formalized as it is today, and it was more so we build it, we chuck it over the fence. The production support team, they manage all the support with the end users, whether it's a B2C, B2B situation or the internal users, and then they're complaining this is a nightmare. You guys could have fixed X, Y, and Z. But at a certain point, that team, it was a better coordination, right? In which with continuous life cycle, we started to see that process improve. And now it's no longer kind of chucking over the fence. We're continuously testing, iterating, pushing out small batches, really kind of looking at this whole thing through like a DevOps life cycle, and the releases are automated. What do you see happening in this respect? Because the beauty about being in the game for a while, you start seeing the patterns, right? It comes,
absolutely.
But you see the patterns. And I see something that's needed there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is really an evolution, both in the industry and also at an individual company level. So you're absolutely right. We've seen, huge strides in DevOps, in cloud infrastructure management, cloud operations from an engineering perspective. And as you're building a company, you're building a product or a startup, absolutely, that first phase is all about ultimately getting to product market fit. You need to develop what you need to develop in terms of functionality and capabilities in order to deliver the value to the customers. And very much the focus is in, are we able to, create new capabilities, develop new capabilities very quickly. But then as you start to scale as a business, as you start to actually acquire customers and evolve that product to meet their growing needs, actually you need broader coordination. You need broader coordination, particularly outside of engineering with finance. And actually, from our perspective, we absolutely think engineering teams are critical in terms of managing, operating the cloud infrastructure. They should be responsible for that, for ensuring it's stable, secure, performant. But actually, we think that finance teams really need to have better understanding, better controls from a cloud financial management perspective. And exactly the same thing exists obviously elsewhere in the business. You have teams that in sales or in marketing where obviously the CMO runs the marketing organization, ensures the performance of marketing, but when it comes to budgeting marketing spend, they obviously collaborate very closely with the CFO. And the same thing very much is starting to happen in finance and in cloud. And it's also because cloud can actually come with real financial risks. So, I think we probably all know that, when you start using cloud infrastructure, and if you go on to any of the cloud providers' websites, the headlines are flexible pricing. So, you can use a server and pay as you go. You pay by the hour for whatever you use. And that's fantastic, right? It allows you to be very flexible, to try new services, to get moving very, very quickly. But actually, that comes at a huge premium. You're paying a huge price for that flexibility. So that's a great place to start. You build the product, you use the product, the services from the cloud provider that you need. And then at the end of the month, you get a bill on your credit card and you pay for what you used. But as you start to scale, those costs really start to add up. But fortunately, all the cloud providers know this, recognize this, and offer great alternatives. So what they all offer is the opportunity to move from that pay-as-you-go pricing to a committed contract, to actually say, okay, I'm paying X per hour for this server. I think I'm going to use it over the next year or 3 years. I can go and buy a commitment to that server. And in return, I can get a large discount, sometimes 50, 60% saving on the price of that server. But that's where the challenge lies. Right? If you look at your infrastructure today and you say, great, we're using all of these particular servers and services, let's go and buy a bunch of commitments to reduce the price we're paying. That can seem like an attractive opportunity. But then fast forward 9, 12 months later, suddenly you're on the hook for paying for perhaps a bunch of infrastructure you no longer need. So you are at risk of actually reversing all of those savings and finding yourself paying for servers and services that are no longer required. And that's actually as a result where big financial costs can come in and big financial risk. And a lot of companies really make the bad decisions around making these commitments. You often have engineering teams going off and buying these commitments without much visibility into the path of the company, the growth and the plans for the company, and then companies ending up having to foot the bill for these, or having to keep using the old infrastructure services they don't want in order to use up these commitments. And obviously what that means from a finance perspective is actually under the surface of this cloud infrastructure, there are a huge number of financial liabilities. You're carrying forward financial obligations with your cloud providers that are colossal often for many companies. And if you made the wrong decisions, can be a real financial drag on your P&L. And finance teams are often unaware of the commitments that already exist, or frankly, the opportunity to make better decisions around those and drive better savings.
So let's kind of go into that, right? Because I'm that what you just said, I'm really curious about that coordination piece. So you've seen, based on what you're saying, you've seen examples where the engineering team are working out contracts with the cloud provider, right? Saying, okay, listen, we don't want to do pay as we go. We know we could get a tremendous savings if we basically buy things up front, like have a commitment for X amount of time up front. And in those conversations, the finance guys are not involved. So
often you can just buy these self-serve through the admin panel of your cloud providers. You can just go in and say, okay, I'm using 10 of a particular type of server. I can click and I can purchase a commitment for 1 year or 3 year. Some of these are paid for upfront. Actually, often, most of the commitments are not actually upfront purchases. It turns out that Amazon and Google have plenty of money. They don't need your cash. What they want is actually a long-term commitment. They want to make sure that you are going to be using a particular server, a bit of hardware for an agreed time. So, anyone with admin access to the cloud admin panel can go in and make these purchases. And really, these are a bit like rental agreements. These are long-term financial commitments that can often rack up, in terms of often, sort of 40 or 50% of your bill can be committed spend. And for many companies, that's often millions of dollars a year that are committed, and the forward commitment, the forward value of those can be into the millions and tens of millions very, very easily. And I think this week is a great example of this, right? Because we just had one of the largest increases in company value ever with Oracle. They announced their earnings call earlier this week. And on that announcement, we saw their stock price soar as a result of Oracle announcing that actually they have nearly $500 billion worth of forward contractual commitments to Oracle Cloud, which is up 300-400%, I think, year on year. And so that means collectively Oracle customers, large enterprises all the way through to small businesses, have signed long-term contracts for hundreds of billions of dollars. And actually, as a result, I think Larry Ellison very briefly was the wealthiest person in the world. So if you want to be a billionaire, just get your customers to sign massive forward commitments to their cloud infrastructure. That's the new big game in town. But it's a big number with big risk.
And this is what I'm kind of want to allude to, right? With those forward commitments, what you're saying is one of the biggest issues. The finance guys are not involved in those conversations.
Either not involved or not well equipped to make those decisions and be part of the conversation. So obviously, if you're going to sign up and purchase a 3-year commitment to a server or service, or indeed a 3-year commitment to your overarching consumption of cloud, you kind of need to know what you're going to use over those 3 years. You need an accurate forecast, and you can only build an accurate forecast if you get finance and engineering on the same page to understand. Are we going to be using this server for the next 3 years? You need to have that plan in place, and that requires finance teams to fundamentally understand how cloud operates, how it scales, and what are going to drive the changes over the next few years in your cloud bill. So it requires both teams to come together, figure out that forecast, and then deal with make the right decisions over these commitments and deal with the potential kind of risks associated with that if that goes wrong. If you look at other areas, when you make these kind of long-term commitments to office space, or if you take out a long-term loan from a debt provider, that's a decision that gets made very, very carefully, gets appropriately accounted for on the balance sheet. Nothing like that happens with cloud infrastructure for many businesses. And as I said, people can really come unstuck if they make the wrong decisions.
Do you feel there's a gap that the finance teams need to be more educated in technology and in the cloud to understand it better? Because it seems like, based on what you're saying, that seems to be a gap.
Absolutely. So I think engineering teams obviously understand how they're using their cloud, and there are tools out there. The cloud providers often have their own tools that give you insight into what did we spend in the last 30 days? How does that break down by server and service? And engineering teams have a reasonable understanding of that. And there are practices that's called cloud FinOps, is a kind of practice and technique for better understanding your bill and subdividing that. But obviously, if you're going to make forward commitments, just looking at what you spent, just by looking at the rearview mirror, you're going to easily become unstuck. So actually, what we need to be able to do is empower finance teams to understand this and translate that into their business model, and understand, actually not look at your cloud bill based on different server types, but actually look at your cloud bill by product lines, by region, by what parts of this are actually to do with customer production operations, what's to do with development, testing, AI model training, and so on. And absolutely, they need support. And we work with a lot of CFOs and finance teams where actually what they're looking for is not just tools and technology, but actually advice, guidance, best practice over what's going on. I have this bill. Are we efficient at all? What could we actually get to? What does that mean for my gross margin or my unit economics? Do I actually have a viable business as we scale this? Is this actually going to be something that we can drive growth and profitability over the long term? And what I would say is, it's not like this is getting easier. Unfortunately, whilst there's a lot of excitement and there's some amazing innovation in the world thanks to AI at the moment, it's coming with massive costs and massive complexity. If you're the company that's implementing AI in your product, delivering that to your customers, that can have a dramatic impact on your cloud bill. It is a very compute intensive thing to offer to customers, whether that's training training a model or using inference and building that into your actual product and service. That can have a dramatic impact on your cloud bill, and really in unpredictable ways. You're sat there, you're talking to the engineering team, and they're saying, "Great, we've developed this new AI capability. We're going to launch that out to our customers, and that's going to deliver great value for them." But as a finance team, you need to really understand, okay, when are we actually going to deliver that? What's that going to mean? How are we pricing that? Are we actually going to have any good margin on top of the cost, the cloud cost associated with that new AI product? Or actually, is it going to be a loss leader for us? Are we going to give this to our customers and just incur cost on the other end? And how's that going to play out over time? What does that mean for the growth of our business? What mean for the kind of unit economics of our business? So, unfortunately, this is an area that is hard, I think, for finance teams to grasp. They need that support. They need that guidance. They need to be able to collaborate with engineering. But unfortunately, it's also going to get more and more difficult over the next few years, certainly.
You see new path in terms of maybe even in majors and for undergrad, in which a person can go into finance, but specifically for the cloud, specifically for technology, to really start becoming that translator, because it seems like that's the gap where you need someone on that particular team who's quite technical, but also has a great finance background.
Absolutely. It is obviously one of the largest line items in fast-growing technology businesses. If you're a finance grad, who doesn't want to work in a great technology company, and who doesn't want to have ownership and responsibility for one of the core parts of the business? So yeah, we see a lot of interest in this, particularly kind of out of FP&A roles. This is, broadly speaking, in the finance team, falls under financial planning and analysis. But you're absolutely right. It requires not just a good handle on Excel and understanding the financial model, but also an understanding of how cloud operates, and also how to collaborate with engineering and how to speak the same language and communicate with them. I think the parallels are really interesting with sales. I think many finance teams, actually do have a pretty good working relationship with the head of sales. They understand the language of sales pipeline and conversion rates and quotas, and finance teams are relatively adept at understanding the data that comes out of a CRM system and understanding how that might translate into impact on their revenue. So that kind of working relationship knowledge and expertise has been developed over the last 10, 15 years, and there's a large body of knowledge around the kind of important metrics associated with revenue and growth and productivity and so on in the sales world. And I think very much the same thing is developing quite rapidly between finance and engineering. As I mentioned, there is a kind of practice of FinOps, which is cloud financial operations, but actually that's very much driven from the engineering side. It's about accounting for what we've spent over the last 3-6 months and allocating that historically to particular business units or products and teams and so on. So that is really a sort of after the fact accounting for what we've done. I think that driven by engineering, I think what's happening is that's rapidly needing to evolve into more of a finance driven practice and more of a forward looking approach to cloud.
A few things, right? So number one, clearly can see how marketing, sales, and finance can be in sync with each other, right? Because even if you look at it from an educational standpoint, you look at, in the school of business, those are subfields within that whole world right there. So you can kind of see the synergy. On the technology side, right, you can see how from, development, security, operations, support can all kind of work together. And you see, even when you start looking at marketing from coordinating with infrastructure, say, you know what, we're running some test here. We're choosing this market. We have to launch this version, or we have to see. You see that coordination, that new coordination between the financial side and also the technology. Yeah, that's a huge gap. And I like what you brought up with FinOps, right? In terms of looking at the past and driven from technology side. I've actually, a few years ago was doing some reading on that, just to going through the whole cloud certifications and so forth, right? That was an aspect, but that's looking at the past. So having a body that can forecast, okay, where are we going with this? How do we now forecast the spend and kind of be right there? Maybe not exact numbers, but approximate, so we can understand and not get blindsided. I have a question for you. Can you share a story where a company got blindsided by runaway cloud spend and it kind of went disastrous? Do you have something like that?
Yes, absolutely. And I won't maybe name names, because actually ultimately this can be quite embarrassing for finance leaders, right? Their responsibility, they turn up at the board meeting, and fundamentally the CFO is meant to be able to turn around to the executive team, to the board, to the investors, and say, I've got this under control. I know what we're spending and I know what's going to happen. And unfortunately, cloud is probably one of those areas where CFOs and finance leaders feel most vulnerable. And I think, we've seen that, certainly. So, we've seen companies under pressure, actually, from their cloud providers, make multi-million-dollar commitments. So a particular company I'm thinking of, made a large-scale, actually 5-year commitment for about $15 million to their cloud provider. And obviously, they're very incentivized to do that. If you're, once you start to, spend a reasonable amount of money on your cloud infrastructure, you will get a phone call from your sales rep at Amazon or Google, encouraging you to think about making a large scale commitment. AWS alone has about 7,000 sales reps whose job is all day, every day, to convince customers to move from that pay-as-you-go model to the committed pricing model. So, the particular company in question made those kind of commitments. Initially, actually it went quite well. But actually the problem is that they were using essentially an old cloud service. Cloud infrastructure has evolved rapidly over the last few years, and there are old generations of the first services from Amazon, and then there's newer ones which are more performant, more secure, more scalable. And the engineering team wanted to make a move to that new service, and it makes a lot of sense for the company. And often we're talking about real trade-offs, right? So in this particular case, the decision that needed made was, we need to go and move to this new Amazon service. It really helps deliver innovation and deliver more value for the product. It's more stable, but as a result, we're going to be left holding the bag on a bunch of commitments that we don't need. And actually, they were burning hundreds of thousands of dollars a week on unused commitments, right? And obviously, there's a big trade-off there, right? The choice was, incur these costs, end up paying for a bunch of these forward commitments they're not using, or stop the engineering team and say, no, actually, you can't innovate, you can't move forward, you can't improve the product, you have to keep using these commitments. And those are obviously really difficult conversations to have. Finance probably not that well equipped to figure out the trade-offs of these. And ultimately, this is a very painful experience and not great for anyone. It's not great for finance because they're footing a bill for something that's not being used. Not great for engineering because actually they didn't really, in this particular case, collaborate particularly well. with finance in the first case, and so kind of the wrong decision was made up front. And actually, it's not that great for the cloud provider. You've got a pretty unhappy customer now who's sat there making payments for things and under a legal contract to continue paying for something. And that's also kind of the situation where maybe a customer might be tempted to look at another cloud provider and start to consider maybe where they want to use someone else. And so these downside risks and these long-term liabilities are significant, and they really are financial liabilities. These are not technical services. These are contractual commitments to pay for something for a fixed period of time, and need to be accounted for as such.
So it because of the way the innovation side of technology, it doesn't seem advantageous to pay for a long-term commitment if you're going to migrate to it, or you're going to eventually want to migrate to something newer, right? To take advantage of their newer features, newer services, which can also help make your services more efficient. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We see customers stuck in this kind of conundrum all the time of, we could make a bunch of commitments to our cloud provider for particular servers or services, and really reduce the cost. And those can be really meaningful, as I said, sort of 50, 60% reduction. But we might actually move off this service, but we don't know exactly when, and we don't know exactly what that impact will be. Will we move off it completely? Will we reduce our spend? And maybe in the meantime we've grown enormously, and so actually we're going to still be using quite a lot of it anyway, right? But because of the lack of a good forecast and a good plan, they can't make those decisions, and so actually end up not making the commitments, and paying a lot more than they need to in the meantime. And I've seen plenty of examples where they could have made a decision, they didn't, they hummed, they hawed, they tried to replan, and guess what? A year goes by before that decision gets made, and they could have easily had those kind of commitments and saved that money. And I think what's really important is obviously a lot of companies are looking to be more efficient as they scale. The era of free capital is a distant memory, and so it's very important as businesses scale to make sure they're efficient. It's actually hard to save money in a business without potentially disrupting growth or innovation. If you cut sales and marketing, you're almost certainly going to cut your growth. If you cut engineering headcount, you're going to slow innovation. Saving money on cloud through these commitments is a fantastic way of becoming more efficient as a company without sacrificing growth. But you need to be able to make the right decisions. You need to be able to deal with the risk that comes with it.
Repercussions of breaking a commitment?
Well, actually, you can't. You've got a legal contract to pay for that commitment. In the past, there have been ways to essentially get out of those commitments. So, in the past, there were the ability, if you like, to resell that commitment to someone else, or to reallocate it if you're part of an umbrella. So, there are a number of cloud service providers that manage cloud infrastructure on behalf of multiple companies, and they could take a commitment from one of their customers and move it to another customer. And so there were sort of loopholes or get out clauses which made it a little easier to deal with those unused commitments. But actually, those rules have all been tightened recently, and that's a direct result of the world of AI. So obviously it's all over the news, the massive amount of CapEx investments going into data centers to build out new cloud infrastructure. So I think this year the major kind of hyperscalers, major cloud providers are on track to spend about $350 billion on new data center build outs. And with that big rise in capital investment, all of the cloud providers are very keen to make sure that their customers are committed and locked in, right? Amazon Web Services don't, if they're going to go build a data center, they're going to go spend $10 billion building a new data infrastructure, compute infrastructure. They don't actually need your money. They've got plenty of cash. They've got access to low cost of capital. But if you're going to spend $10 billion building a data center, what you really want to know is, are people going to use it? are we going to be able to maintain high utilization of that data center? And so the cloud providers are very, very keen to get their customers to commit. And as a result, they've really tightened and closed all of those kind of major loopholes. Amazon was the latest to do so. So on the 1st of June this year, they changed their fundamental terms and conditions and basically blocked the ability to kind of redistribute commitments between customers. And about a year before, they made some major changes that kind of heavily restricted the resale marketplace. They operate a very small resale marketplace for a few of the types of commitments they offer, and they heavily restricted that as well. So very much, the era of kind of easy commitments that existed for a few years, where you could kind of get out of these things if you didn't need them, that's really gone away. And so again, we've got rising rising cloud costs being driven by AI, and at the same time, the kind of flexibility loopholes that once existed are rapidly disappearing. So it's becoming, a very serious consequence, really serious risk if you get this wrong.
What are like the biggest myth that leaders believe about cloud costs that you see?
That it scales predictably. I think honestly that the sort of idea that this is a very fluid, liquid, we're only paying for what we use, leads people to very easily think that this is just going to grow in some sort of linear way with revenue. Okay, we expect revenue to grow 50%, so our cloud bill is going to grow 50%. And it's very easy to build a forecast, a budget that just connects your revenue to your cloud spend, and those things drag right on your spreadsheet, and just assume that that's going to play out as your business grows. Obviously, as we've been talking about, that's really not the case, right? New customers can have a very different impact on your cloud spend, and obviously engineering roadmap and new product launches can have a huge step change impact on your cloud. So that's probably the most painful thing. It is just not a simple, easy, linear relationship.
That's interesting, and I could totally see, based on everything else they deal with on the finance side, why that myth. They would believe that myth, right? Like most things work like that, right? We grow this way, this will grow, and then this will increase our expenses, and that's trying to think.
Absolutely, and it's the same. If you think about most software costs, actually, it's relatively predictable. If you have a CRM system, finance teams can say, okay, it costs us X amount of dollars per seat. Well, we just have to model out, if we've got a model of how many salespeople we're going to have next year, that's how much we need, to pay for our CRM system. So, a lot of the time, it's easy to assume that you can just take a usage metric or a revenue metric and say, okay, we'll just scale according to that. But this is a completely different beast. Actually, when you look at your cloud spend and you see one invoice coming in, one bill coming in from Amazon, or from Google or from Microsoft Azure, you might think, okay, it's just one thing. But actually, within that invoice, it's hundreds of different products and services that are being used, that are all being used in different ways, or growing in different ways, and all being compressed into one bill at the end of the month. And that's inherently what drives a lot of the unpredictability.
Yeah, that's it. It's interesting. That's interesting, because another question I have for you, right? So we look at startups, we look at Fortune 500 companies. Do you think their approach should be similar? Like, are there certain universal principles that both can utilize, or it's really dependent on the size of the company when it comes to cloud spend?
Yeah, so I think it's easy to assume that at an early stage, this is not a predictable thing, right? You're growing very rapidly, you're innovating on your product very frequently, and therefore, this must be something that's unpredictable when you're smaller. But eventually, okay, as you get bigger and you move into spending tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars a year on cloud, that actually things are going to slow down, things are going to get easier. Unfortunately, it's not the case. Actually, chaos and complexity tends to grow over time as a company grows, right? You launch multiple product lines, you have different engineering teams with different roadmaps, and communication tends to get more difficult rather than less as companies scale. So actually, this is something that remains a problem, whether you're 50-person kind of early stage company all the way up to thousands and thousands of employees, and therefore the principles of how to think about this often translate as you get larger. So it's really about thinking about driver-based forecasts. Okay, understanding what are the metrics that you have that are going to drive your cloud consumption? Is it revenue, customers, users, transaction volumes? What are the kind of key things as a finance team it's good for you to understand about what lies behind your dollar revenue number, and then to really understand what in your what in your engineering roadmap may actually impact your cloud spend. So how do you think about the long list of things you're planning to do over the next 3 to 6 to 12 months? Some of those are simple code changes, right? They're things you go and deploy, and they change maybe how a button in your product works, but they don't change how your cloud is being used. But other items on your roadmap actually have a material change. They are re-architecting something of the product. They're deploying a new capability. They're going to use something new. So understanding those drivers, if you like, of your spend continue. Obviously, they may get more and more complex. You might, as I said, with different product lines and different teams, but ultimately those principles continue. And then making the decisions over, what are we prepared to commit to? What kind of financial liabilities are we prepared to take on? Obviously, smaller customers tend to have less cash on hand, a smaller balance sheet, maybe not willing to take the same kind of risks as maybe a larger company with deeper pockets. But at the same time, larger companies often are reporting to their shareholders and their boards, and are much more sensitive to changes in gross margin, changes in profitability. And so, again, you kind of get some trade-offs there, but it's remarkable to see how this is a really consistent problem as companies scale.
So, we have things, we can financial model different things. Is it possible to leverage AI, right, to create some sort of model to assist us with our cloud spend? In terms of where the company is going, their user base, and so forth. Can we model that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we actually spend a lot of time doing. That's a lot of what we've been building. There's very, very powerful use of AI to, first of all, dissect and understand what you're spending and how that relates to your business. There's you've got a massive list of servers and services that you're using, but using AI to correctly map that to your business structure, which would be very different to someone else. And then I think there's also fantastic uses of AI in actually translating what's on the roadmap into the impact, right? Engineering will have a ticket in the roadmap that says, we're planning to do XYZ next month. AI is a fantastic way of then taking that and understanding, okay, what might that mean for actually the services we use and the cost of those? How have other people who've had a similar plan for their product and their roadmap, what was the result of that? How did that change their consumption? So, as we spoke about, this is to a degree about a relationship between finance and engineering. So it's a lot of conversations. And as we know, AI is actually really good at understanding language and conversations now, and interpreting that and turning words and conversations into structured information. And so absolutely, AI has a fantastic role to play in this. AI is starting now also to get into the world of prediction in terms of statistical predictions and so on. And so we also some really interesting techniques there. And ultimately, AI and predictive analytics in particular plays a huge role in then analyzing that forecast to figure out what are the right commitments to make. There are thousands and thousands of different options of the potential combinations of commitments you can make, and figuring out which ones, whether it's 1 year or 3 year, do I buy one for a specific server or for a different service? and what's the optimal combination of those, given how volatile or not certain consumption is. That's absolutely a prime use case for using AI, as we think about it, really to drive an underwriting model. If you think of these commitments as financial liabilities, then what you really need is an underwriting model to assess, at any one moment, what's the risk of making a commitment? If I purchase that commitment, what's the likelihood that it's going to get used? What's essentially the default risk that I make? I take on a financial liability and I can no longer pay for it, or I no longer want it. At the end of the day, as I said, these commitments are real financial liabilities, and our approach to this is treating them as such. We run cloud infrastructure like a financial asset, like a financial investment, and then we think about the risk of making these commitments in exactly the way you would do with a loan, with a financial liability. You think about if I offer this commitment, if I offer a loan to a customer, I need to think about what's the affordability of that. Do I think they're going to repay that? And exactly the same kind of principles can be applied to cloud commitments.
No, I like it. Because that's the first time I've heard this term in terms of looking at your cloud commitments as a financial asset. And then if you looked at it that way, similar to the getting a mortgage or any type of loan, right? You have to analyze the risk. I know from a real estate development perspective, that's something that I'm into. You'll look at it and say, all right, I have to, no matter what, I'm going to get this money to renovate or build something. I have to pay that monthly interest, right? And if for some reason you can't, right, that's a red flag for not getting that loan, or maybe the interest is smart or whatever. But it's rare when, I think one of the issues is when you make these commitments, you're not forking over cash immediately, right? You're just signing something. As time goes on, and when it's like getting cold on a margin, it's like, okay, well, the money's due. And, based on what you said earlier, right? You can't now go to the marketplace and say, you know what, maybe if we want to upgrade or shift, we can sell this to another company that can leverage it, because they tighten the reins on that. So it's definitely really analyzing the risk, which, we're coming towards the end of the show. And I would like you, I'm going to give you some time to really get into Cloud Capital and how that works, because it seems like we're transitioning to that.
Yeah, well, I think this is the problem that we faced firsthand when we were managing colossal cloud spend and what we've been trying to solve for. And actually, the thing is, this problem has been solved in many places before. Cloud infrastructure is fundamentally the commodity that powers the world. And just the same as with every other commodity, the people who provide it want to have long-term commitments, right? If you're going to drill for oil, or you're going to go build a data center, what you really want to make sure is someone's going to buy it at a predictable price. And those who consume a commodity always want the same thing. They want the best possible price with the maximum flexibility. They want to make the decision on this at the last possible moment, just kind of pay for what they need. Everywhere else, this problem has been solved thanks to financial markets, for people who are willing to step into the middle of that and go long on a commodity at an agreed price, and then provide that to manufacturers, to buyers of the commodity on a more flexible basis, and create a financial market in the middle. And that's exactly what we're looking to achieve. And we help companies deal with this exact problem. So we help really in kind of two ways. The first is helping people forecast their cloud spend. As we've spoken about today, for many CFOs, your cloud bill is a complete black box. You really don't understand what's happening today, let alone how that's going to be in 6 months, 12 months time. We provide free forecasting software that enables CFOs and engineering teams to collaborate on building a long-term, predictable, easy to understand forecast for their cloud spend, so that they can make the right decisions, so that they can have predictability. And then using that forecast, we underwrite commitments to their cloud provider. So we run a very powerful AI-driven underwriting model that enables us to identify exactly which commitments to make, where the customer takes or benefits from the savings from those big discounts we talked about, but we actually take on the financial risk. And what that means is we can go make a commitment on your behalf, and then if at some point during the term of that commitment, we make a 3-year commitment, and halfway through year 2 you don't need that, we pay the cloud provider and you don't have to. So you get all the benefit of the discounts, but none of the downside financial risk. And that's because we really think, as I said, about these commitments as financial assets and financial liabilities, and we can understand the risk, and we can price that risk and manage that risk ourselves, and help customers get much more predictability, much more efficiency from their cloud bill, and actually make sure finance and engineering have a better working relationship.
I want to talk to you about that, because based on everything we talked about throughout the show and the mitigation of that risk in terms of taking on the risk of a commitment that didn't work out, you're confident in doing that because of the way your technology analyzes and forecasts their cloud spend. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the software platform that enables finance teams and engineering teams to come together to triangulate between what are you spending today, what are your projections for the growth of your business, revenue, customers, usage, and so on, and your engineering roadmap. And we bring those 3 data sets together, and we use a lot of AI and to understand what those mean in terms of how are you using your infrastructure today, what parts of that are volatile and not, what parts of that are connected to your customers' consumption, to how your people use that, and so on. And that allows us to project that forward and then overlay your engineering team's plans for new products or for re-architecting, for migrations, and so on. That product is obviously really critical. It gives us the insights we need to then assess what's actually likely to happen with this infrastructure. If we make a commitment, what's the likelihood that it's actually going to go and get used? And we manage these commitments as financial liabilities. We manage a capital reserve. We operate much more like a bank than a software company. And that allows us to understand the risk and to manage that risk on our customers' behalf, so that actually they don't have to have that on their own balance sheet. They don't have to manage that and deal with the downsides of that themselves. They get the benefit of, obviously, first of all, the forecast. They now have finance and engineering working in lockstep with a predictable plan. They get the benefits in terms of the efficiency and the savings, but they don't have to deal with the downsides of those commitments, the lock-in or the financial cost of ending up overcommitted. So we really enable them to have a really clear plan for cloud, know when they turn up at the next board meeting that we've got this under control, that we know how predictable we're going to be, we know how this company is going to scale, and we're not taking on undue unknown risk.
Amazing. That's amazing what you do. I personally, in my travels and conversations, haven't heard of that particular service. So exciting to see where it goes and how you build a future in your technology moving forward.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, I think it's a very exciting opportunity. It's obviously a big area for so many companies these days, and I think it's only going to get bigger over time. So we're really excited about the future and helping companies on this journey.
Yeah, I don't know if I said this stat earlier, but they said by 2030, data centers worldwide are projected to require 6.7 trillion in CapEx to keep up with compute demands, especially for AI workloads.
Yeah, I think there was a comment recently from Elon Musk who said he expects most of the energy from the sun to be needed to power compute infrastructure in the long term. So this is the biggest investment that's ever happened into data centers, and that big investment at the data center level is just going to come knocking with every customer, and you're going to go and obviously be under enormous pressure as a consumer of cloud to make commitments to back all of those investments. So this wave of data center investments we've been seeing over the last kind of 18, 24 months, that wave is going to come crashing down on a lot of customers, and they're going to have to make some really important, big, risky decisions around these commitments and managing their cloud. And that's where we're here to help.
No, amazing stuff. Ed, how can people find you?
You can find us online, cloudcapital.co. We have obviously our forecasting platform that you can sign up, use completely free. We provide that free to anyone who wants to use that to manage their cloud budgets and planning. And also we have a wealth of content. So if you're a finance leader or a CFO struggling to understand what on earth this bill that you've just got means and how that's going to change over time, we provide a lot of really useful guidance and support to finance leaders there. So cloudcapital.co, we're always here to help.
So cloudcapital.co, the website's part of this video now, so you guys can look at it at any point in time and find it there. Ed, I would love to thank you for today. It was a great conversation. It's one of our 5 years doing this. We have not talked about cloud spend. So you are now our de facto cloud spend expert, up until you sell the company, of course, eventually. When things happen, you're a friend of the show. We reserve the right to circle back with you and explore some things happening in the news and so forth.
Well, every time they announce another 100 billion has been spent on a data center, you can get me back. So I'll be back here probably every week, I think.
That sounds good. Listen, to the audience, we really thank you very much for tuning in. As I always say, whether you watch the show live, whether you watch it tomorrow, next year, we thank you for your viewership. Every week, we have a free newsletter at the Tech Behind FinTech that you could take part in. So what you would go is to the website, Tech Behind FinTech /subscribe. Drop in your information, and every week you'll get a newsletter with what's happening in the fintech world and also upcoming guests. We have a pretty cool lineup booked. Every Friday, 12 p.m. we go live. So on that note, Ed, thank you very much. To the audience, thank you for tuning in, and everyone have a brilliant weekend. Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.